Thank you, Ashley, once again.
No
And
worries.
I would like to directly start asking the questions. So, first of all, I would like to ask what inspired you to write this book and work on this topic?
Well, this topic was very much connected to my own work and practice in the field.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, I spent 5 years in London working at
Hmm.
Sedition Art, this online platform for distributing digital limited editions by contemporary artists.
Hmm.
And I went back to study in a PhD to kind of step back and reflect on my own work and practice in the field through some of
Hmm.
my engagements online with different artists in the community
Hmm.
and trying to understand the field that I'm working in and how it's evolving with all this new technology as well. And to
Hmm.
also resituate my position, and to see how my work can be taken, further in different ways with my studio practice and meta objects. So meta objects kind of formed as well as part of my research to try to
Hmm.
reformulate a new direction for my work or to reflect on what I did in the past as well.
Hmm. Hmm. And in your book, you describe economies as both social and material. Could you elaborate on how this duality reshapes the way we think about artistic production right now at the moment?
Yeah, so the social and material are not separate.
Hmm.
So in the book, I referred to organization study scholars like
Hmm.
Wanda Orlikowski, who draws on the
Hmm.
work of Karen Barad, who say that the two of social and material are inextricably entwined. So it becomes
Hmm.
kind of impossible to conceive of the object, the material object, without understanding its social context and
Hmm.
through specific practices. Um, and so in the sense, we look at objects through its circulation in different art markets, either online as NFTs or as viral media on social
Hmm.
media, or in galleries and in the art market. Um, and so artworks gain this kind of multi-layered meaning
Hmm.
um, as it circulates in different material forms as well, in different economies. And so these economies are kind of different social systems where the artworks gain meaning and value,
Hmm. Hmm.
different kinds of meanings and values as objects and images. So rather than conceiving of a finite material object, artworks
Hmm.
become relational, where they only exist in context of their circulation.
Hmm.
And so this way of thinking about art is more a process-oriented view,
Hmm.
uh, where artworks exist in time and change in different relational entanglements as it circulates in different modes of production and exhibition. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. And you propose shifting from a human-centric economic model to an ecological understanding of economies. How has this perspective influenced your own practice with meta-objects you just mentioned?
Yeah, so an ecological approach is essentially a relational, sense,
Hmm. Hmm.
where I view meta objects. When we started the company, we did not have a clear idea of what we would do, or we didn't have clear aims, and we didn't take ourselves as a pre-given entity. Rather, we discovered what we would be or do through our collaborations with artists and our engagements in the field. And so we necessarily view our role as evolving together with the communities that we're involved in. So we do not limit the possibilities of what we do or what we could become. And so in this sense, our work and existence is always in process of defining itself
Hmm.
and in a process of becoming and in conversation with others.
Hmm. Hmm. And how do post-media artworks challenge the traditional gallery and market structures?
Yeah, so I connect post-media artworks with the development of conceptual art, where
Hmm.
the concept or ideas become central to the work. So ideas are expressed in the sense through different media, whether it's performances or installations or digital media. And in the sense, post-media artworks are not necessarily defined by a particular medium or a fixed material object that can be easily bought and sold. So what may be commodified in the case of conceptual works are set instructions or documentation or certificate of authenticity. So like conceptual art, digital art doesn't have a fixed material object often, and can be restaged with different hardware, for instance, in installations. And so the lack of a fixed object means that artworks only exist when it's being staged in an exhibition, often requiring, audience interaction. And so the traditional art market depends on originality and authenticity of the unique objects, such as painting or sculpture. And I find that in the, even today, we continue to fall back on this logic of uniqueness, like trying to find a unique object. And arguably, paintings and sculptures continue to be much more easier to sell than, digital artworks or other kinds of performance or conceptual based works. And in this sense, I feel like there's a need to expand our conception of art markets and acknowledge the diverse economies that artists engage in to sustain their practices.
And in speaking of licenses and authenticity, can you share insights on how licensing and certificates of authenticity transform our understanding of ownership in digital and conceptual art?
Yeah, so without a fixed material object for conceptual and digital art, what is owned is the certificate of authenticity and the rights to use and display the work that is usually outlined in a licensing agreement. So the licensing agreement is a legal contract which determines how the work may be used and displayed, and usually stipulates a given time frame and a specific site where the artworks can be displayed, like a museum or gallery or a screen. And so in this way, it becomes more of a rental contract than actually purchasing and owning the artwork in perpetuity. So it shifts away from the idea of ownership, where people can just rent artworks for a fixed period of time. And in this sense, artists retain the ownership of their work and can continue to earn from that work. Whereas when artworks are sold, any future profits belong to the person who bought that work, unless the contract stipulates that there are resale rights for the artist on the secondary sales. But we can also see that, collectors also loan their works to museums or exhibitions. These are kind of rental agreements, but it's often the proceeds are going back to the buyer, the person who purchased the work rather than to the artist. And so in the book, I kind of propose that licensing is maybe more suitable for dealing with kind of conceptual and digital works. And there's also possibilities to design new economies with licensing, because the agreements can have different terms and ways of defining what is the artwork, rather than focusing so much on kind of the buying and selling and ownership of the works by elite collectors.
And how do you interpret the paradox between the infinite reproducibility of digital art and the art market's demand for scarcity? What role do you think NFTs played in temporarily resolving or complicating this paradox?
Yeah, so the nature of the digital medium is that files are infinitely reproducible without any differentiation between the copy and original. So the copy is just as original as the original. But despite this, with digital art, there continues to be efforts to create artificial scarcity through mechanisms like limited editions and certificates of authenticity. However, these are kind of fictions, because when we consider platforms like Sedition, the digital object is not unique by any means, since every
Yeah.
time you kind of load the video, it's creating a new instance, which may be cached onto your computer. But what is scarce is actually the access to view. And I found that, sedition continued to reinforce this idea of exclusivity through digital rights management, to create the sense of value. And with NFTs, they essentially turn these digital objects into financial assets. So like with the licensing agreement and certificate of authenticity, the object is kind of separate from its ownership. What you own is the certificate to say that you are the owner and it's an original work of art. And what is owned is the contract, or in the case of NFTs, it's the unique token, which is owned in lieu of a unique object. So with NFTs, digital artworks can continue to circulate online freely and be multiplied infinitely and accrue value. It accrues kind of symbolic value through its circulation as viral media. But for me, it's a little bit unintuitive to try to reinforce scarcity of digital objects when it kind of goes against the nature of the medium. But we also can see that, with financialization, it makes it possible to own almost anything, own and speculate on almost anything, including artworks that have been destroyed, like in the case of Banksy.
Yeah, true. And you describe this, you describe artists forming companies or collectives as part of their practice. Do you see this as a pragmatic necessity or as an artistic gesture in itself? In contexts like Hong Kong or Shanghai, you mentioned that companies can hold more institutional power than individuals. How does this shape artistic ecologies?
Yeah, so often it is a pragmatic necessity to form a company or collective, since sometimes it's almost easier to facilitate funding opportunities, particularly for artists working with technology and design. So I found that, younger generations of artists understand the vulnerabilities of being an independent artist and want to avoid the kind of disempowerment of this romanticized notion of the starving artist. And instead, there's a kind of conscious effort to engage with the commercial infrastructures that can give artists more power and enable them, despite aligning with more corporate or commercial interests. There are other artists like Zhu Zhen in Shanghai, who also deliberately approaches forming a brand or a company as an artistic gesture. And also historically, there have been many artists engaging with corporate aesthetics, particularly post-internet artists, but also prior conceptual artists who use kind of branding strategies as a way to intervene within social and economic life. And in terms of, the context of Hong Kong and Shanghai and a lot of parts of East Asia in general, there is still a kind of pressure from family to pursue kind of lucrative careers in science, law, and engineering. There's not as much of a focus on becoming artists or creatives because it's hard. Parents know that it's hard to be sustainable. So forming a company in some ways helps to legitimize their practices and demonstrate to their families and society that they can work in art and design and cultural fields and be economically sustainable. And I found that Hong Kong is a very business-centered city. It almost seems like that businesses and companies have more say and have more power than individual artists. And I found that many artists will register a company just as a pragmatic necessity in order to get paid. Because sometimes it's easier to pay a company than to pay an individual and do certain amounts of paperwork. You also get certain amount of tax breaks and things like that. But I also found that forming a company is interesting to enable like collaborative forms of work. And they can also let artists get larger contracts, and they have a certain more leverage in certain situations legally and economically.
For the last question, what possibilities do you see for rethinking artistic sustainability when art is seen as an evolving process rather than a product?
Yeah, so I view art and culture as a process of, creating or staging artworks, where anyone involved, including the curators, producers, or technicians, all have a stake in a project. So art becomes, in a sense, more of a collective endeavor, which may also decenter the artist as the primary source or creator, or in the sense. And I view creativity as belonging to everyone, where anyone can participate. And in this way, it becomes possible to consider funding projects rather than focusing so much on artists and the artist's identity, where projects can evolve and contain many different participants involved in the process. And registering a company also becomes a legal way of facilitating funding for projects rather than an individual. And a company can also be arranged as a cooperative where there is a kind of shared ownership. And so in the book, I mentioned towards the end about using DAOs, or decentralized autonomous organizations, and blockchain technologies to facilitate collaborative production, which is the case of Ensemble that I mentioned. And I would see, focusing more on process as funding more incubation of creative projects and supporting R&D without the need to have clear aims or outputs, the need to produce an object or a finite finished object. So I think artist residencies also serve this purpose, to incubate ideas and to bring people together in dialogue, and to really think about artwork as never finished. It's always needs to be staged and restaged in the future. And so artworks evolve over time with different collaborators who help bring it and continue its life over time. So in a sense, the artwork doesn't necessarily belong to any one creator, but anyone who participates in letting the work continue its life through our shared practices.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. That was all my questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much.